Every spring, people pull a particular weed out of their gardens and throw it in the bin. They've been throwing away more omega-3 than most fish have, per gram. That's one plant on this list. There are 16 others. One of them sits in a kitchen cabinet in almost every home in the country. Most people have no idea what it does, and the very last one does something none of the other 16 can do. It makes the exact same omega-3 molecule fish are famous for. Not a version of it, the same one. I spent over 20 years as a registered nurse. In all that time, nobody handed patients a list like this. Nothing here replaces your doctor. I'll say it once more before we're done. 17 plants, real numbers, honest caveats, some you'll recognize, some you've been pulling out of the ground for years without knowing what you had. Wait until we get to number 17. Let's start with the weed. Purslane. Most people know it as the thing choking out their tomato bed. Fat little succulent leaves, reddish stems, spreads low across bare soil like it's got something to prove. Folks pull it by the fistful and toss it in the yard waste bin without a second glance. Here's what most of those folks don't know. Back in 1992, researchers testing fresh purslane leaves found something that surprised the entire field of plant nutrition. 100 grams of fresh purslane, that's about a cup, loosely packed, carries somewhere between 300 and 400 milligrams of a fat called alpha-linolenic acid, ALA for short. It's one of the omega-3 family. Compared to spinach, compared to lettuce, compared to nearly every leafy green tested against it, purslane came out ahead by a wide margin. Think of the fat in your food as building material. Most of what we eat gives your body the stiff, rigid kind. Fine for storage, fine for energy. Omega-3 fats are the flexible kind. Your cells use them to stay supple, to communicate properly, the way a well-oiled hinge swings smooth instead of catching. Purslane also carries a trace of something called EPA, a longer, more complex omega-3 that almost no land plant produces on its own. It's not much, a gram or two per kilogram, honestly, but it's there, and that alone makes purslane unusual. I want to be straight with you, though. A cup of purslane won't match a spoonful of flaxseed oil for raw omega-3 numbers, not even close. What purslane does is beat out other greens, not seed oils. Context matters here. I pull mine fresh most mornings, dew still on the leaves, and toss it raw into a salad with a squeeze of lemon. A little sour, a little grassy. Simple. Evidence indicates it may support a healthier balance between omega-3 and omega-6 fats in the diet overall. And that balance, more than any single food, is what your body actually responds to. Research on purslane has found an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio below 2:1, meaning more omega-3 than omega-6 in the same leaf. That's rare for any land plant. There's more packed into those leaves than just the omega-3 too. The same 1992 study found purslane carried roughly 7 times the vitamin E of spinach, along with solid vitamin C and glutathione, a strong antioxidant profile for a plant most people compost. Talk to your doctor before making any big changes to your diet, especially if you're managing a health condition already. That's not me being cautious for the sake of it. That's just good sense. Little black and white seeds, barely bigger than a poppy seed. Doesn't look like much sitting in a jar. 1 ounce of chia seeds, about 2 tablespoons, carries close to 5 grams of ALA omega-3, 5,000 milligrams. To put that number in perspective, you'd need to eat roughly 4 pounds of purslane to match what's in a single ounce of chia. Chia comes from a flowering plant in the mint family, native to Central America, and it grows beautifully in a pot on a sunny windowsill. Doesn't ask for much. Here's the part that surprises people. Chia seeds are almost entirely covered in a soluble fiber that swells up the moment it touches liquid, water, milk, juice, doesn't matter. Drop a tablespoon into a glass of water and walk away for 10 minutes. You'll come back to something closer to pudding than seeds. That gel-forming behavior slows digestion down, which is part of why chia gets credited with helping people feel full longer. I've watched it do exactly that in my own kitchen more mornings than I can count. Soak a tablespoon or 2 overnight in a splash of milk, add cinnamon, a little honey. By morning, you've got breakfast that took 90 seconds of actual effort. Rare, a seed this small carrying this much. Potent, too, for its size. The plant itself, Salvia hispanica, was cultivated by the Aztec and Mayan peoples long before it turned up in a modern grocery store, prized enough at the time that it was sometimes used as currency alongside corn and beans. Beyond the omega-3, chia carries a genuinely notable amount of calcium and magnesium for a seed, along with more fiber by weight than most whole grains people reach for instead. Growing it yourself for seed production is a bit more involved than most windowsill herbs, since the plant needs a fairly long warm season to flower and set seed properly. Most home gardeners in cooler climates grow it more for the pretty purple-blue flowers than for a real seed harvest, and that's a perfectly good reason on its own. Studies suggest regular ALA intake from sources like chia may support cardiovascular wellness as part of an overall healthy pattern, not as a stand-in for anything your physician has already prescribed. Flaxseed carries more ALA per gram than almost anything else you'll find on this list. 3 tablespoons of ground flaxseed will run you somewhere around 4.5 to 6 grams of ALAA, well above the adequate intake most adults are told to aim for, from a single serving. Linum usitatissimum is the botanical name, and people have been cultivating it for thread and oil for something like 9,000 years. It is quite honestly one of the oldest crops human beings have bothered to keep. Here's the part folks get wrong constantly. Whole flaxseed passes right through the body mostly undigested. The shell is too tough to crack on its own. You have to grind it. A coffee grinder does the job in seconds, or your body never gets to the fat locked inside. Once it's ground, though, keep it in the fridge or the freezer. Those fats are the flexible kind I mentioned earlier, and flexible fats go rancid fast once they're exposed to air and light. I do need to flag something here, plainly. Flaxseed has mild blood-thinning properties, and in meaningful amounts it can interact with prescription blood thinners. If you're on medication like that, please have this conversation with your doctor before you start sprinkling flax into everything. It's an easy conversation to have, and it matters. Around here, I stir a spoonful into oatmeal most mornings. Simple. Barely tastes like anything, honestly, which is half the appeal. Traditionally, flax has been grown across cooler climates for longer than written history bothered to record it. A blessing, I'd call it, that something this old still earns its place on a modern plate. There's a second family of compounds in flaxseed worth mentioning briefly: lignans, plant compounds that have been studied for a range of hormonal and antioxidant properties. Research there is still developing, and I won't overstate it, but it's part of why flax gets so much attention beyond the omega-3 number alone. As a garden plant, flax puts up slender stalks with those blue flowers lasting only a single day each, opening fresh every morning through the bloom season. Watching a whole bed open at once, before the sun's fully up, is one of the small pleasures of growing it yourself. It's an easy annual for most home gardens, tolerant of average soil, and it doesn't need much beyond decent drainage and a reasonable amount of sun. Harvest the seed heads once they've dried and turned brown on the stalk, then thresh them by hand over a bowl or a clean sheet. 1 ounce of walnuts, about a small handful, 14 halves or so, carries roughly 2.5 grams of ALA. Among all the tree nuts commonly eaten, walnuts sit in a category by themselves. Almonds, pecans, pistachios, none of them come close. This is a good spot to explain something I promised you back at the start. ALA, the omega-3 in walnuts, flaxseed, chia, purslane, every plant on this listee, isn't the exact same molecule found in salmon or mackerel. Picture it like raw lumber versus a finished cabinet. ALA is the raw material. Your body has to run it through a conversion process to turn it into EPA and DHA, the longer-chain omega-3s that fish already carry ready-made. And here's the honest part, research keeps confirming. That conversion is low. Studies find somewhere between 6 and 10% of ALA gets converted to EPA in most adults, and considerably less becomes DHA, often under 4%. The numbers vary by person, by diet, by sex. Plant omega-3 still counts. But it isn't a one-for-one swap for a fillet of salmon, and I'd be lying to you if I said otherwise. Walnut trees are a different kind of commitment than the seeds and greens we've covered so far. 3 to 5 years before you see a real harvest, sometimes longer. Not the plant for anyone in a hurry, but once established, a single tree keeps producing for decades. My neighbor's tree is older than both of us put together, I'd wager. A handful, raw, unsalted, tossed over a salad or straight out of the bag. That's about as complicated as walnuts need to get. There's also a practical reason walnuts hold up so well compared to other nuts. That thick, ridged shell does a genuinely good job protecting the delicate fat inside from oxidation, right up until you crack it open. Store them shelled and whole, rather than pre-chopped, if you can, and they'll keep noticeably longer. English walnut and black walnut are the two you'll most commonly find for a home garden, and they're not quite interchangeable. Black walnut roots release a compound that can stunt or kill certain nearby plants, tomatoes especially, so it's worth checking what you're planting close by before you commit to a spot. It's not a small tree either, so plan for that mature size before you plant. A young sapling that looks perfectly reasonable in a small yard can shade out half a garden within 15 or 20 years if it isn't given room to grow into. Ancient, patient, worth the wait. 3 tablespoons of hulled hemp seeds carry somewhere around 2.5 to 2 3/4 grams of ALA, alongside a solid 10 grams of protein in that same serving. What sets hemp apart isn't just the omega-3 number on its own. It's the ratio between omega-3 and omega-6 fats sitting inside those seeds, which lands close to 3 to 1 in favor of omega-6. That's a far better balance than most cooking oils, though flax and chia, for comparison, actually carry more omega-3 than omega-6 altogether. Think of omega-6 and omega-3 like 2 lanes of traffic that need to stay roughly even for things to flow smoothly. The standard Western diet runs 1 lane packed and the other nearly empty. Hemp seeds help even that out. This is the low THC cousin of the cannabis plant, grown specifically for seed and fiber, and legal status for home cultivation varies quite a bit depending on where you live. Check your local regulations before you plant anything. That's just practical advice, not a lecture. No cooking required. I sprinkle them straight over yogurt, over salads, into a smoothie. Simple, neutral, nutty flavor. Doesn't fight with anything else on the plate. Hemp also carries all 9 essential amino acids in a reasonably complete profile, which is unusual for a plant seed of any kind, and part of why it's earned so much attention among people eating mostly or entirely plant-based. The plant itself grows fast and tall, sometimes reaching 10 feet or more in a single season, with very little in the way of pest or disease trouble. Whatever it needs to thrive, it mostly finds on its own. Traditionally used across many cultures for both food and fiber, long before anyone measured a single fatty acid in a laboratory. Perilla, also called shiso in Japanese cooking, produces seeds that press into an oil carrying somewhere between 54 and 64% ALA. That puts it alongside flaxseed oil at the very top of the plant oil rankings. Both are the richest dietary sources of ALA currently available. 1 tablespoon of perilla oil delivers somewhere around 8 grams of ALA, a single tablespoon. The leaves themselves are what most home gardeners actually grow. Fragrant, slightly minty, a little like basil crossed with anise. They show up constantly in Korean and Japanese kitchens, wrapped around rice, pickled, layered into salads. The oil is the concentrated source. And here's the important part. Don't cook with it overheat. Polyunsaturated fats like this one break down and can even form harmful compounds when they're exposed to high temperatures for too long. Use it the way you'd use a good finishing olive oil, drizzled on afterward, never in the pan. This plant self-seeds readily once it's established. Sometimes a little too readily, dearie. Ask anyone who's grown it and then spent the next spring pulling volunteers out of every bed within 10 feet. It handles a Pacific Northwest garden just fine, tolerating the damp mornings and the mild summers without much fuss. Beyond the omega-3, Perilla's been studied specifically for its role in easing seasonal allergy symptoms and general inflammatory response, though I'll say plainly that research is still early days, more promising than proven. Traditionally used across East Asian herbal medicine for a very long stretch of time, well before any of that formal research existed. Both green and purple varieties exist, and they behave a little differently in a garden. The purple type tends to hold its color better in a salad, while the green variety is what you'll most often find in traditional Korean side dishes, pickled whole and stacked in a jar. A blessing, honestly, how something this useful asks for so little in return. Camelina sativa, also called false flax or gold of pleasure, which has to be one of the more charming names in the whole plant kingdom. Its seed oil runs somewhere between 35 and 40% ALA by weight, high enough that researchers have called it one of the richest dietary sources of plant omega-3 currently available. People have been growing this crop since the Bronze Age, across what's now Northern Europe and Central Asia, long before olive trees ever made it that far north. It nearly disappeared from cultivation for a couple of centuries, pushed aside by higher-yielding crops. It's come back into research attention over the last few decades, partly for its omega-3 profile, partly for industrial uses, including aquaculture feed. That last part matters. Unlike flax oil or perilla oil, camelina oil has a noticeably higher smoke point, which means it tolerates a light sauté far better than its more delicate cousins do. As a garden plant, camelina is almost stubbornly easy. It tolerates poor, dry, rocky soil that would make most vegetables give up entirely. Frost doesn't bother it much either. Simple, ancient, nearly forgotten, and worth bringing back. It matures fast, too, somewhere around 85 to 100 days from seed to harvest, which is quick for an oilseed crop, and it fends off a fair number of common pests and plant diseases better than most of its more finicky relatives. Pressing enough seed at home to matter takes real volume and the right equipment, so most home growers treat this one as an interesting crop to grow and understand rather than a realistic oil source on their own kitchen counter. Still worth planting, in my opinion, if only to keep the seed line going. I grow a small patch along the fence line where nothing else has ever wanted to take. Canola oil is, without question, already sitting in most kitchens across this country. What most people don't realize is that a single tablespoon carries a little over a gram of ALA omega-3, a modest number, but one most of us are already consuming without giving it any credit. Canola itself is a cultivated variety of rapeseed, bred specifically decades ago, to reduce two compounds that made the original plant unpleasant to eat in quantity. The name itself is short for Canadian oil, low acid, not exactly poetic but accurate, because the fat molecules in canola oil are more stable than the ones in flax or perilla oil. It tolerates regular cooking heat reasonably well, which is exactly why it ended up in so many pantries in the first place. The plant itself is a striking thing to grow. Honestly, a whole field of it turns a shocking, almost impossible shade of yellow come late spring. Even a small patch in a home garden puts on quite a show. Pressing your own oil at home is possible with a small manual press, though it's a hobbyist's project more than a practical kitchen habit. Most folks are better served simply reaching for a bottle of the cold-pressed variety at the store. Evidence suggests that swapping a portion of saturated cooking fats for oils higher in unsaturated fats, canola included, may support general cardiovascular wellness over time. Not everyone agrees on where canola sits in a truly whole foods pattern of eating, and I understand that hesitation. Cold-pressed and minimally refined versions preserve more of the natural nutrients than the heavily processed bottles on most store shelves, so read the label if this is one you're leaning on regularly. As a garden plant, rapeseed is a cool season crop, usually sown in early fall in milder climates like this one, overwintering as a low rosette before it shoots up and flowers the following spring. A little patience is involved, same as with most of the better things out here. 100-gram serving of edamame, young soybeans, still in their green stage, carries somewhere around 200 to 280 milligrams of ALA depending on variety and preparation, alongside a genuinely impressive amount of complete plant protein for a vegetable. Soybeans are one of the only plant foods that provide all 9 essential amino acids in meaningful amounts, which puts them in rare company among vegetables. I do want to mention one thing plainly. For anyone managing a thyroid condition, soy has been studied for possible interactions with thyroid medication absorption when eaten in very large quantities close to dosing time. It's a manageable issue for most people, generally just a matter of spacing meals and medication apart, but it's worth a conversation with your doctor if that applies to you. Soybeans are genuinely one of the easier crops for a home garden. Plant them after the last frost, and you'll have pods ready to harvest by late summer, steamed lightly and salted, straight out of the pod. I grow a short row every year, more out of habit than necessity at this point. There's something satisfying about popping a warm pod open with your thumb. Simple, filling, a quiet little staple. Like the beans we'll get to later on this list, soybeans are legumes, which means the same nitrogen-fixing arrangement applies here too. The plant partners with soil bacteria and leaves the ground a little richer than it found it. A row of soybeans, watched closely, will show you the whole progression in a single season. Small yellow flowers first, then fuzzy green pods swelling almost by the week. It's a satisfying plant to keep an eye on if you enjoy watching a garden actually change day to day. Timing the harvest matters more with edamame than with most vegetables. Pick too early and the pods are thin and disappointing. Wait too long and they turn starchy, closer to a dry bean than the tender green snack you were after. A week or so of watching usually gets it right. A half cup of cooked Brussels sprouts, roughly 78 grams, carries about 135 milligrams of ALA, not the biggest number on this list, but a genuinely useful one, especially given how few calories come along with it. Here's something worth knowing. Some research on Brussels sprouts has found meaningfully higher available omega-3 content in the cooked vegetable compared to raw, which runs against what a lot of people assume about cooking and nutrient loss. Roasted with a little olive oil until the outer leaves char slightly. That's how I make mine, most falls, once the frost has had a chance to sweeten them up a bit. These are a genuinely slow crop, planted in early summer, harvested well into the cold months, sometimes standing right through a light snow out here. I remember my grandmother swearing frost improved the flavor. Whether that's the actual botany or just something she'd always said, I honestly couldn't tell you anymore. But I've never once had a bad frosted sprout, so I'm inclined to believe her. A quiet, patient little vegetable. Sturdy. They belong to the same wide brassica family as kale, broccoli, and the mustard greens we'll get to shortly. Cousins, all of them, each one carrying its own small piece of the same story. They grow tall, honestly, taller than most people expect the first time. Sometimes 3 feet or better, with the sprouts stacking up the stem like a strange green ladder as the plant matures through the season. Kale carries a real but modest amount of ALA, a fraction of a gram per cooked cup. I won't stand here and tell you kale is some hidden omega-3 powerhouse because it simply isn't, not compared to seeds and oils. What kale does well is stack. A little omega-3 here, a good dose of fiber and vitamin K there, folded into a pattern of eating that adds up over weeks and months, not from any single dramatic serving. That's really the whole story with most of the vegetables on this list, if I'm honest with you. None of them replace the seeds or the oils. They support the pattern around them. Kale is about as forgiving a crop as this garden grows. Cold doesn't bother it. Slugs mostly leave it alone, and you can cut leaves for months from the same plants without replanting a thing. Massaged with a little olive oil and lemon until it softens, that's my usual approach. Takes the bitterness right out of it. Steady, reliable, not flashy, and there's nothing wrong with that. There are dozens of kale varieties, and they don't all behave the same in a garden bed. Curly kale holds up better to cold. The flatter lacinato type, sometimes called dinosaur kale, tends to be a touch more tender for eating raw. Like its cousins on this list, kale carries a small amount of ALA alongside a modest amount of omega-6, and the overall ratio leans reasonably favorable, though nowhere near as dramatic as what we saw with Purslane back at the start. Mustard greens carry somewhere around 48 milligrams of ALA per 100 grams, higher than kale, though well below Purslane, which we started this whole list with. That's actually the same research that first measured Purslane against other leafy greens back in the early 1990s, and mustard greens showed up right alongside spinach and lettuce in that comparison. Solidly mid-range, better than some, well behind the Purslane we opened with. They carry that same peppery bite you'd expect from anything in the mustard family. sharper raw, considerably milder once cooked down. Baby leaves, a couple inches tall, work beautifully raw in a salad. Let them mature past that, and they're better wilted into a pan with a little garlic. This is a fast crop, ready in as little as 3 to 4 weeks from seed in warm soil. Good for anyone who wants a quick, early return on a new garden bed. I've got a row going right alongside the Purslane most seasons. Feels fitting, somehow, keeping the two together. Mustard has been grown and eaten across nearly every continent for thousands of years, both for the leaves and for the seeds that get ground into the condiment most people already know it for. Some gardeners even use mustard as a cover crop between seasons, tilled back into the soil to help break up compaction and discourage certain soil-borne pests, quietly earning its keep even when nobody's eating it that particular year. There's a fair range of mustard varieties, too. Some bred more for tender salad leaves, others for a sharper, spicier bite once cooked. Worth trying a couple of types before settling on the one that suits your table. Broccoli carries a small amount of ALA, well under 1/10 of a gram per cup, which won't win it any awards on this particular list. But it earns its spot here, for the same reason kale did. It's already sitting in most refrigerators, already part of most weekly shopping lists, and every small contribution toward that daily omega-3 target adds up over time. I'll say this again, because it bears repeating. None of this is medical advice tailored to your specific situation. If you're managing a chronic condition or taking medication regularly, please loop your doctor into any real changes you're considering. That conversation costs you nothing and protects you a great deal. Once you cut the main head, most broccoli plants keep sending up smaller side shoots for weeks afterward. A second harvest, essentially, from the same patch of soil. Steamed just past bright green, still with a little bite left in it. Overcooked broccoli is a genuine tragedy, in my opinion. Rustling in a light rain most mornings out here, the leaves catching drops like little cupped hands. Beyond the small omega-3 contribution, broccoli carries a genuinely solid dose of vitamin C and fiber for so few calories, which is really the case for most of this brassica family we keep circling back to. It's a cool season crop through and through, and it tends to bolt, send up flowers early and turn bitter the moment a real heat wave hits. Plant it early enough in spring or hold off until late summer for a fall harvest, and you'll avoid most of that frustration entirely. Collard greens carry a small, steady amount of ALA, similar in range to kale and broccoli, modest but real and worth counting. What I appreciate about collards is how sturdy the leaves are, large enough and tough enough to use as a wrap in place of a tortilla or a slice of bread. Fill one with rice, beans, whatever you've got. Roll it up. Simple lunch, and one more small serving toward that overall omega-3 pattern we keep coming back to. Blanched briefly, they soften enough to roll without cracking, which took me a couple of tries to get right the first time I tried it. Traditionally a southern staple, though the plant itself grows just as happily up here in a cool, damp Pacific Northwest bed. Slow to bolt, which means it holds through heat better than a lot of its cousins in the cabbage family. I've got a patch that survived 2 winters now, just cutting leaves as I need them. Stubborn plant. I mean that as a compliment. A blessing, really. A green that just keeps giving without asking to be replanted. Like kale and Brussels sprouts, collards tend to sweeten a little once they've been through a light frost, which is worth keeping in mind if you're planning a fall garden and wondering when to actually harvest. The plant itself can grow surprisingly large if you let it, sometimes reaching a couple of feet across, and a single, well-established plant will keep producing outer leaves for cutting far longer than most people expect from a single seedling. Harvest from the outside in, taking the older, larger leaves first, and leaving the young center growth alone. Done that way, a handful of plants can keep a household in greens for months without ever needing to replant. A cup of canned black beans carries around 300 milligrams of ALAE, a genuinely respectable number for a legume, alongside a hefty dose of fiber and plant protein in that same serving. Here's a little piece of garden science I find genuinely satisfying. Beans, like most legumes, host bacteria and nodules along their roots that pull nitrogen straight out of the air and fix it into the soil. They're feeding the very bed they're growing in, quietly, the whole season. It's the kind of arrangement that makes me think somebody designed this system with real intention. a plant that feeds itself and feeds you. Easy from seed, minimal fuss, and they'll climb a trellis, or sprawl low depending on the variety you choose. I favor a climbing type along the back fence, mostly because it saves space. Soaked overnight, simmered slow with a bay leaf and a little cumin. That's about the whole recipe, and it served me well for years. Dried and stored properly, they'll keep in a pantry for a very long stretch, which makes them one of the more practical crops to grow if you're thinking about food security rather than just flavor. Black beans also carry a meaningful amount of antioxidant compounds concentrated in that dark seed coat, similar in family to what gives blueberries their color, though the research comparing the two directly is still fairly limited. A single well-tended row will keep producing pods over several weeks rather than all at once, which spreads the harvest out nicely, instead of leaving you buried in beans on one single afternoon. Pinto beans run a little lower than black beans, around 270 milligrams of ALA per cooked cup, but they bring their own strengths to the table. The fiber and ALA combination in beans generally gets credited with supporting steady blood sugar and cardiovascular wellness, according to a fair amount of nutrition research at this point, though beans work best as part of a broader dietary pattern rather than any kind of standalone fix. Slow cooked with onion and garlic until they turn soft and a little creamy, that's the traditional approach across most of the American Southwest, and it's hard to improve on something that's been refined over that many generations of kitchens. Bush varieties stay compact, which makes pinto beans a reasonable choice even for a fairly small garden bed. They don't ask for much, steady watering, decent sun, and they mostly take care of themselves from there. Simple, unassuming. The kind of plant that does its job without ever calling attention to itself. Between the black beans and the pinto beans both feeding their soil as they grow, a bean patch is one of the more generous things you can plant in a garden that's seen a few too many demanding seasons in a row. Pinto beans have a long history across Mexico and the American Southwest specifically, where they've been a genuine dietary staple for centuries, well before anyone was measuring fatty acids or talking about omega-3 at all. Last one on the list, and it's not exactly a backyard weed, but I promised you a twist, and here it is. Every plant we've covered so far makes ALA, that raw material I explained earlier, the one your body has to convert, slowly and imperfectly, into the omega-3s fish are actually famous for. Seaweed breaks that pattern entirely, red seaweeds especially. Dulse, nori, the kind wrapped around a piece of sushi, contain measurable amounts of actual EPA, not a plant cousin of it. The same molecule salmon carries. Here's the part that ties this whole video together, if you think about it. Fish don't manufacture their own omega-3 from nothing. They get it from eating algae, directly or further up the food chain. Seaweed is closer to the actual source than the fish sitting on ice at the market. This isn't just another green on a very long list. It's the one plant here that skips the conversion problem entirely. I do want to be fully honest with you about the amount, though, because overselling this wouldn't serve you. A typical serving of dried seaweed carries far less EPA than a cooked fillet of salmon. Even from the richest testing red varieties, a serving delivers a fraction of what a piece of salmon provides. Meaningful, but not comparable in raw quantity. Seaweed adds to the picture. It doesn't replace a fish dinner outright, and I won't pretend otherwise. Growing your own isn't quite as simple as tucking a seed into garden soil. Most home growers who take this on are working with small saltwater aquaculture setups or foraging responsibly along a clean, cold coastline with someone who actually knows what they're doing. For the rest of us, dried dulse and nori from a reputable seller are a perfectly good way in. Different seaweeds lean different directions, for what it's worth. Red varieties like dulse and nori tend to test highest for EPA specifically. Brown varieties like kombu and wakame lean more toward ALA. Green varieties fall somewhere in between. Worth knowing if you're shopping with any of this in mind. There's an iodine consideration worth a plain mention too. Seaweed, kelp especially, can carry very high iodine levels, well above what the body needs in a day. A light regular habit is one thing. Eating large amounts daily is another, and that's a conversation worth having with a doctor if seaweed becomes a bigger part of your routine. Rare. The only plant on this whole list that closes the loop completely. And that, dearie, brings us to the end of 17. Now, before you go, let me pull this together the way I see it, sitting out here with my basket half full of greens and a cup of tea going cold beside me. 17 plants. From a weed most people rip out of their gardens without a second thought, all the way to a sea vegetable that makes the exact same omega-3 found in salmon. None of them are a miracle. I don't believe in miracles dressed up as vegetables, and I'd be doing you a disservice if I pretended otherwise. What they are is a pattern. A handful of flaxseed here, a purslane salad there, mustard greens sharing a bed with beans that are quietly feeding their own soil. Small, steady choices, stacked over months and years, the way most real health actually gets built. Please talk with your doctor before making any significant changes, especially if you're managing a health condition or taking regular medication. I spent 20 years at the bedside watching what happens when people skip that conversation, and I've never once regretted encouraging someone to have it. I look at a garden like this one, and I see provision. Simple as that. Whatever you believe, there's something worth noticing in how much of what our bodies need was already growing quietly around us, long before anyone measured a single milligram of it. From a weed most of us were taught to hate, to a bean quietly feeding the ground it grows in, to a piece of the ocean itself. 17 very different plants, and every one of them earning its place on this list honestly, numbers and all. If you're new around here, I put together videos like this most weeks, always working from real research, always willing to tell you plainly when something's more promising than proven. That's the whole approach, really. Nothing fancier than that. If this kind of thing is useful to you, consider subscribing. I put a new video like this together every week, and it genuinely helps to know folks are finding it worthwhile. Here's my garden fence question for you today, and I'd love an honest answer down in the comments. Of these 17, which one is already growing somewhere on your property right now, completely unnoticed? Go check. I'll wait. Stay blessed, and I'll see you in the next one.